In clinical settings, the root causes of relationship dissolution are often misdiagnosed. Take two separate cohorts of couples. Both groups report the exact same frequency and the exact same intensity of disagreements regarding their sex lives. This chart tracks relationship quality on the y-axis against sexual disagreements on the x-axis. As the friction increases, the data lines for these identical cohorts diverge. One line crashes downward while the other remains stable. Standard clinical predictors, like attachment style or general personality traits, fail to explain why one group collapses while the other thrives. Baseline relationship satisfaction also fails as a predictor. At the start of the study, both groups reported nearly identical levels of happiness. The actual driver of this divergence is a domain-specific cognitive schema known as implicit theories of sexuality. By deconstructing the empirical data from Maxwell and colleagues, we can map the specific mechanics of these schemas. These domain-specific beliefs provide a predictive map for whether routine friction will destabilize the partnership or leave it intact. Traditional implicit theories are modeled on a single horizontal spectrum. They assume people view personal attributes as either fixed and unchangeable or malleable and capable of growth. This model implies a zero-sum assessment. If an attribute is seen as fixed, it cannot be viewed as malleable. A confirmatory factor analysis of sexual relationship data disrupts this model, revealing that in the domain of sexuality, these beliefs exist on a 2x2 orthogonal grid. The first axis represents sexual growth beliefs, the framework assuming that sexual satisfaction is a result of deliberate effort and behavioral modification. The second axis represents sexual destiny beliefs, the framework assuming that sexual trajectory is determined by innate natural compatibility. Because these constructs are statistically independent, they are only weakly correlated with one another. This means an individual can simultaneously believe that sex requires hard work while also believing in the importance of finding a soulmate. Treating sexual beliefs as a single spectrum prevents practitioners from identifying the two independent processes that dictate how a partner responds to conflict. To understand why, we need to return to our opening chart and isolate the negative regression line associated with the high destiny cohort. The baseline data confirms that high destiny believers do not start their relationships with lower satisfaction levels. When sexual disagreement is low, their overall relationship quality remains indistinguishable from the norm. The vulnerability only appears as sexual disagreements rise, triggering a sharp decline in their perceived relationship quality. This happens because high destiny believers use sexual friction as a diagnostic barometer. This schema leads them to equate a localized disagreement about sex with a holistic, unresolvable failure of the entire relationship. For the destiny believer, the conflict is not just a problem to be solved, it is evidence of absolute incompatibility. The mechanisms change when we look at the cohort operating on sexual growth schemas. Broadly, growth beliefs correlate with higher baseline relationship and sexual satisfaction. However, the data reveals a specific boundary condition. Growth believers are still affected by high levels of sexual disagreement. On this chart, which tracks subjective sexual satisfaction, we see the positive slope compress and flatten out as sexual disagreements increase. But here is the paradox. Even as their sexual satisfaction drops, their overall relationship quality remains insulated from the decline. Growth believers use a compartmentalization mechanism, reframing sexual friction as a solvable, localized puzzle. Relationship resilience functions as a cognitive firewall, allowing partners to quarantine sexual dissatisfaction so it doesn't degrade global relationship metrics. When pressure reaches a breaking point, normative relational schemas can fracture, moving the situation into a different diagnostic category. Lundy-Bancroft's clinical typologies, such as the demand man or Mr. Right, provide a framework for these fractures. These profiles operate on a distorted and rigidly enforced version of fixed destiny beliefs. A normative destiny believer responds to perceived incompatibility by concluding the relationship is a poor fit and withdrawing. A pathological abuser responds to that same perceived incompatibility by using psychological or physical coercion to enforce compliance. While the destiny schema is a method for evaluating compatibility, the coercive schema is a tool for ignoring it. Normative friction leads a destiny believer to end a relationship. For an abuser, that same friction triggers a mechanism of control. Relational assessments that ignore the specific domain of sexuality miss the primary driver of these outcomes. Mapping a couple's position on the bidimensional matrix reveals exactly how they will process the inevitable conflicts of long-term partnership. Clinicians must distinguish between high destiny withdrawal and pathological coercive control to provide accurate support. The Maxwell data demonstrates that the survival of a long-term sexual relationship is not determined by the frequency of disagreements. Survival depends instead on the specific cognitive architecture partners use to